In conversations between religious believers and non-believers, a very specific kind of frustration often emerges. It happens when a person, deeply confident in their faith, presents it as the ultimate answer to life's meaning. Yet on the other side, the listener, who has no religious belief, feels nothing at all. No sudden insight, no spark of curiosity, not even interest, just a quiet sense of resistance. This reaction isn't about being stubborn or difficult. The issue runs deeper. Religious people often believe that every human being carries a God-shaped hole inside, that faith is the natural state of existence, while doubt or atheism are flaws that need fixing. But when that framework meets someone who sees no need for faith in the first place, communication breaks down. No logical argument, no passionate sermon can bridge that gap. The reason is simple. Religious belief isn't primarily built on evidence. It's built on trust. Trust in a story, in a tradition, in a sacred authority. And if that trust isn't granted from the very beginning, then no emotional testimony, no holy scripture, and no personal experience will resonate. Not everyone feels a need for religion's answers. Some people aren't afraid of death, and the idea of life being finite actually gives their experiences more meaning, not less. For them, the promise of heaven doesn't sound appealing. It feels like a solution to a problem they never believed they had. A common argument from religious people is morality. The claim that without God, there can be no real sense of right and wrong. But this assumes that human beings need rules handed down from above in order to treat each other with kindness or fairness. In reality, moral behavior doesn't require divine punishment or reward. It comes from empathy, from social agreements, from understanding that other people's happiness and safety matter just as much as your own. Research even shows that many secular societies often outperform religious ones in important areas. Countries like Sweden, Norway, and Japan, where belief in God is relatively low, consistently rank among the most peaceful, cooperative, and well-educated places in the world. Lower crime rates, higher literacy, and stronger trust in institutions suggest that goodness doesn't depend on religion. It grows out of human effort, shared values, and the collective project of building a better society. Helping others, then, doesn't come from fear of hell. It comes from recognizing that their well-being is just as real and valuable as yours. Many religious people assume that what convinces them will also convince others. But conversion doesn't work that way. Emotional highs during worship, personal stories of healing, or moments of divine insight can feel overwhelming to the person experiencing them. But to someone else, they may feel empty or meaningless. Neuroscience even offers some insight here. For example, people with temporal lobe epilepsy sometimes report powerful religious visions or intense spiritual feelings during episodes. That raises an uncomfortable question. If your most sacred experiences can be reproduced by a misfiring brain, are they really evidence of anything beyond yourself? Sacred texts face a similar problem. Quoting the Bible, or any holy book, to someone who doesn't already accept its authority is like calling a witness the jury doesn't recognize. It's not persuasive. In fact, it's circular reasoning, trying to prove the truth of a belief by referring back to the belief itself. For someone who values logic and evidence, that doesn't come across as convincing. It comes across as confusing. Another common approach is the idea of having a personal relationship with God. But relationships require two-way interaction. For someone who has never felt the presence of a deity, being told they're in denial or rebellion doesn't make sense. It feels more like being blamed for not answering a phone call that was never made. There's also the fact that many atheists, or more accurately, non-believers, tend to know more about religion than the average believer. Pew Research studies have shown that atheists often score higher on religious knowledge tests. This isn't about arrogance. It's about understanding exactly what they've chosen to reject. For many, disbelief doesn't come from ignorance, but from careful reading and reflection, followed by the conclusion that nothing within those texts feels convincing. In other words, it's not a lack of exposure to religion. It's the result of having taken religion seriously enough to study it, and still finding no reason to believe. Another reason conversion often fails is that religion tends to universalize deeply human experiences. Feelings like awe, love, or despair are often presented as evidence of the divine. But these emotions can just as easily arise from nature, music, or human connection, without pointing to anything supernatural. Just because an experience is powerful doesn't mean it proves the existence of God. Religious arguments sometimes turn historical too. People point to the beauty of cathedrals, the legacy of religious art, or the influence of scripture on law and culture. But being influential or historically significant doesn't make something true. Alchemy influenced chemistry, and astrology influenced astronomy, yet we wouldn't call them accurate. Power and influence aren't proof. They're simply markers of impact. Even less common tactics like using fear are ineffective. Threats of eternal punishment or hell carry no weight for someone who doesn't already accept the system. Warning someone about judgment from a deity they don't believe in is like telling them to fear fines from a government that doesn't exist. It just doesn't register. A subtler but equally ineffective approach is pity. The idea that non-believers are lost, incomplete, or missing out on something essential. This doesn't usually offend, but it does reveal a fundamental misunderstanding. You can't miss what you don't value. If someone isn't seeking salvation, they aren't suffering from its absence. Perhaps most importantly, belief isn't a matter of choice. You can't will yourself to believe something you find unconvincing. Try to believe the moon is made of cheese. Try to believe in a God you've never felt, seen, or heard from. You can go through the motions, but genuine belief doesn't work that way. It forms naturally or it doesn't, based on your experiences, reasoning, and understanding of the world. This is why religious people often feel frustrated. They think belief can be chosen, like picking a team or joining a club. But for someone who doesn't find the premise believable, there's nothing to convert to. There's also a growing recognition that religion answers fewer questions than it raises. Questions like, where did God come from? Why are there so many contradictions in sacred texts? Why are miracles so conveniently unprovable? Why is faith required for salvation, but not for something as observable as gravity? A system that demands belief without evidence can't easily persuade someone whose standards for truth rely on testable claims. It's not about stubbornness. It's about valuing inquiry over certainty. People who prioritize questioning are not foolish. They simply operate within a different framework. Trying to convert someone outside that framework often feels like speaking two entirely different languages. Words like truth and evidence are defined in fundamentally different ways, making the conversation almost impossible to bridge. It's also worth noting that many non-believers have actually deconverted from religion. They've already been inside the system. They've prayed, cried out for answers, and tried to believe. But when nothing came back, that absence became definitive. It's not about anger or rebellion. It's about having looked sincerely and found nothing convincing. Sometimes silence speaks louder than words. For those who no longer believe, the world is still full of meaning. It's just not the kind handed down by ancient texts. Meaning is found in small acts of kindness, shared laughter, spontaneous love, and long walks under stars that don't care whether you believe in them or not. This isn't emptiness. It's freedom. And no amount of preaching can compete with the quiet satisfaction of knowing you don't need to be saved from something that never felt wrong in the first place.